Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to another Snapshot video. This is Snapshot 21w17a, which just arrived yesterday for the Minecraft Caves and Cliffs update, and we are currently looking around in a Caves and Cliffs world with the expansion Datapack that introduces 1.18 content for Caves and Cliffs Part 2 as well, because I have a couple of things I want to test out with this video, and once again, I'm going to test these out in a hybrid of survival at first and then creative, but you've probably seen some of the features of this update already. It's introduced new types of caves and a few tweaks to existing Caves and Cliffs features. What matters most, I think, about this snapshot from a player point of view is that there aren't really any new features for the update that we'll be seeing in summer. There actually aren't a whole lot of features left for that update, it seems like. And so what we're seeing now is just tweaks and refinements to the existing features that we're getting so that potentially those features can be better tested, and sooner or later all of those bugs will be ironed out and it'll be ready for release sometime potentially quite soon. So, what do we get in the meantime? Well, we've got a few changes in this, most of them actually pertaining to copper. Since I'm using a data pack for this snapshot, we are going to be looking for large copper veins once again, because they have apparently been made a little bit smaller and a little bit rarer, but are still pretty large, and there are even some changes to how they generate that are going to be kind of fun to track down and explore. So I wanted to make this video primarily about copper, because there are a couple of other changes to copper in this snapshot that I think are going to be quite significant for areas of the game that you might not have considered. But before we get into any of that, I did just notice a shipwreck offshore somewhere over here, so I'm going to go and head over to the shipwreck just in case I can get hold of some moss blocks, because that's going to be the way we encounter them in survival, aside from getting them from the Wandering Trader, before 1.18 comes in and adds lush cave biomes to the underground. Now, my way of looting the shipwrecks has not really changed. I tend to dive down below decks, use the door here as a quick pocket of air. Let's grab what's in the chest over here. We got a buried treasure map there. I'm pretty sure it's in the shipwreck chests themselves that we are likely to get any moss, and it looks like we don't have any of that here, although we do have a protection hat. We've got a Curse of Binding chestplate that I might not put on, but we've got some Curse of Vanishing leather trousers, which I probably will. So let's leave that in there. Let's see if the chest up here towards the front of the ship has any moss in it for us, because I guess that technically kind of counts as treasure. Nope, just iron and some emeralds, but that's a great source of iron to start us off here, and I won't need to go caving for iron. We can probably just head to the nearest vein, or if we don't drown too much, and start mining for copper. And we got our first copper right down here. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting, because copper will now drop multiple copper items. The raw copper drops have been increased to 2 to 3 per copper ore block, which has some pretty interesting implications for the near future. There's a vein right there as well. There's only a small blob of it though, and I am starting to get those lag spikes in the world, so I'll try and cut out as many of those as I can from the footage here, so you'll probably see me standing around and talking a little bit more than I would be if I was just exploring. So from that little vein of a few blocks there, we had 6 blocks there, 2 over there. I now have 16 copper, so from 8 we got twice as much, which is pretty good if you ask me. That's certainly enough to get us started with our first few blocks of raw copper. And while we're over here, the buried treasure map that I got hold of seems to indicate that we're going to be around here. So let's use that 9-9 coordinate trick that I showed off in a recent video. That looks like it's going to be right here. Interesting spot for it. You don't normally get them this far inland. There it is, and we got some diamonds instantly. Wow, okay. Well, I love that trick. I'm going to be using that all the time, of course. We don't really need the Heart of the Sea, but I'm going to grab it anyway because any loot is good loot. So right away, we've got ourselves a diamond pickaxe. Look at that. We've got all 4 pickaxes basically there. Don't count the gold ones, of course. And we now have enough copper to make a block of raw copper. Of course, blocks of raw copper come at a premium. You need 9 of these raw copper items in a 3x3, and in this update they've actually changed the crafting recipe for copper blocks, so they require a 3x3 of ingots as well. Let me go grab some stone and make a furnace, sorry about the lag spikes there, so that we can test this out. So I got myself enough stone for a furnace, and we're going to stand in this little gully here and smelt some of this raw copper into copper ingots, because now we can make a copper block using a 3x3 of copper ingots instead of a 2x2. And that's a bit of a change in the crafting recipe, but that is now because we have the option of getting 2 or 3 raw copper items without fortune from one of these blocks, meaning that with fortune, we potentially stand to get a little bit more. The proportions are going to be slightly different to other ores now, because we're used to getting like lots of redstone and lapis out of ore blocks, whereas with copper, I'd presume the maximum we could get would be 3 or 4 times the amount that copper is going to drop, meaning a maximum of 12. But I haven't really done a huge amount of testing. I haven't seen what the upper threshold of that is right now. Okay, for now I seem to have shaken off the jittery bug that's been happening with this data pack, and hopefully that will hold off for long enough for me to make a slightly better video for you guys. I'm going to head over there to get those sheep just so that I can potentially get myself a bed and sleep through the night. But on the way, I want to talk a little bit about this change to copper. So this change actually relates to both regular copper ore and deep slate copper ore, but the twist is deep slate copper ore doesn't actually generate in the world. It's part of the creative inventory, meaning that map makers can use it for maps and players can, add it to world generation if they have the ability to manipulate that stuff. But the reality is that deep slate copper just doesn't exist as part of natural world generation, even in the snapshots for 1.18. But a few people have now had the idea, I'm exploring this by the way, just in case this happens to be a copper vein, because I see a lot of granite right here next to a copper ore block. So yep, looks like we might have found at least a copper patch in here if this isn't a full vein of copper. No, I don't know actually. Evidence suggests that this might not be a copper vein. There is some surface lapis though, which is kind of rare actually, but ore distribution is changing all the time. I don't know what all of the rules are yet. But anyway, some folks have posited on Twitter that potentially deep slate ores could drop more of those raw components. The deep slate iron we end up getting and deep slate gold could actually drop more of the raw iron and raw gold, giving players a little bit more incentive to go down into those deeper layers of the world looking for those materials in the first place. And either way, King B-Dogs from the development team did point out that this is a fun advantage to having raw materials dropping from iron, copper, and gold blocks now, or the ore blocks rather, is that you can now have multiple of these items coming out at once, and they can change the drop rates for them a little bit if they feel like these materials need a little bit more of a boost. For example, like I said, copper ingots can now only make a full copper block in a 3x3. So that is how you make 1 block of copper. And that was originally the crafting recipe, but then it was changed to 2x2 back when you could only get 1 ingot per block, and people thought the recipe got a little bit expensive. Now, however, this kind of realigns copper with the other resource blocks, like blocks of iron, which require a 3x3 crafting recipe with 9 ingots in order to make. And in fact, people have suggested that potentially now both copper blocks and raw copper blocks are made with 9 items. Maybe the team would be open to smelting raw blocks into full blocks of the corresponding material. Right now, if you put a block of raw copper in a furnace, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't get cooked down into a full block of copper. And there might be a couple of reasons for this. I mean, it feels like this wouldn't work with the previous copper block recipe, but now it's a 1-to-1 conversion. Materials are no longer a factor now that this isn't a 2x2 block to make a block of copper. The thing here is now dramatically reduced smelting time and fuel expenditure, which could end up feeling kind of unbalanced. If I can use 2 sticks to smelt 9 iron all of a sudden, then that maybe changes the balance of how players actually use fuel in the game. And I feel like there's already been an established fuel economy for a little while. The flip side to that, though, is obviously that you need 9 items to smelt. You would need to have 9 raw copper or raw iron to make into a raw copper or iron block before you could smelt it down into a full block of copper or iron. Same with gold, obviously. You get the idea. The point here is that it's going to need 9 items each time, and then you would always probably have leftovers unless you were fairly calculated in how you acquired these materials that you would need to smelt those into ingots individually. I don't know if they plan on doing that in future, but it's at least an interesting take on resource and fuel management. There is also not really any kind of precedent for items taking longer to smelt. Basically anything you want to smelt, which I don't really have any great examples of here right now, but let's say I'll make some charcoal as an example. This charcoal is going to take exactly the same amount of time to smelt in a furnace as anything else would, including stuff like netherite scraps. Like the end game materials of Minecraft take just as long to smelt in a regular furnace as any other item does. So we can presume that Mojang doesn't want to change smelting time so that like a full block of raw copper would take 8 times as long to smelt, maybe save you the time for that extra 1 ingot or something, but I don't think the furnace time is negotiable. I think that's kind of one of those hard-coded things that's going to be a bit of a pain to break apart and make a slightly different system for. So if we're going to be able to smelt full blocks of copper, we kind of need something to balance that out. And one thought I had was to restrict the recipe for a block of raw copper smelting down like that to a blast furnace. The blast furnace obviously was introduced in 1.14, and you need to get 5 iron ingots. I've just had to use 5 of my iron ingots in order to craft that one. Or you find one in a village, I suppose. And I wonder if maybe smelting down entire blocks of raw material into full blocks could potentially be moved to the blast furnace. That does take away the time argument as well by making it like twice as fast to do, but that's really all the blast furnace does right now, is it gets material like this and smelts it twice as fast as a furnace does, which, you know, isn't really a very unique use. The only thing it saves is time, which can be useful later, but most people aren't really going to worry about how long it takes a blast furnace versus a furnace to smelt all of their materials. Like, maybe in a speedrun or a competitive context, it might be a little bit more helpful for you, but aside from that, you're going to save, like, you know, half a second here or there, and it's not really going to make that much of a difference to the broader scope of your Minecraft gameplay. But since blast furnaces and smokers as well were introduced, I really felt like they could use some more unique uses to kind of give us a reason for using them beyond just as a villager workstation for an armorer or a butcher, and I think this could be a step in the right direction if we're able to directly smelt blocks of raw material into full metallic blocks. But alas, as of right now, we are unable to do that, so I'm just going to smelt down the rest of this copper, because next it's time to talk about the uses of copper. So right now the uses of copper are relatively few. There are copper blocks, there is the lightning rod, which I should be able to craft, yeah, with 3 copper ingots like so, and the spyglass, which I can't craft right now because I haven't gone exploring to find an amethyst geode. This world is getting lag spikes, so I figured I would rather not worry too much about exploring right now. But the copper is currently limited to those 3 crafting recipes, and of course the variants of copper blocks. So you've got the weathered versions, you know, the fully eroded copper that has that wonderful green patina to it, the verdigris, and those are really cool uses for it. I love the fact that they've added blocks that can age and change over time. I think that's a really fascinating mechanic, but to the majority of people, copper is not going to have a great deal of uses. I think it has the potential to broaden out a lot in future updates, but nothing they've really got planned for the Caves and Cliffs update right now. So maybe it will be linked to archaeology in some way, and we now know that archaeology is going to be delayed until a future update so that they can expand the system and make it a little bit more fun and Minecrafty. We could potentially see it used in brushes, which we know are going to be a tool linked to archaeology. You could even see copper, as a lot of people have suggested, taking inspiration from real-life electrical wiring and being used as an expansion to redstone in future. One thing I am pretty confident about, though, is that it's not going to be used for tools and armor. It just doesn't have a space in the current tool progression. I can't see myself making a copper pickaxe and that having any benefits that having a stone or an iron pickaxe wouldn't. And while iron has become a little bit more difficult to find at surface level, as you saw, it was pretty easy for me to just swim into a shipwreck, grab all of the iron and bypass most of the tool progression, and then we even got a diamond pickaxe from the buried treasure. So copper just becomes obsolete very quickly if you want to use it as a tool and armor crafting ingredient. I honestly haven't seen a good argument for how copper could fit into the material progression that way. Like, players either want more durability, which you get from netherite right now, easier access to higher tier materials, which honestly just going and looting the nearest structure can usually get you some diamonds pretty quickly, or they want some kind of unique, maybe like enchantment ability or a built-in thing, like how the turtle helmet has water breathing for 10 seconds, for example. But in real life, copper is so soft that it's likely that its use for a pickaxe or a shovel would be on a similar level to gold. I honestly don't see it being an effective tool if they're looking for the slightly more realistic implications, the intuitive mechanics behind copper. And really, any kind of unique enchantment or ability that you gave copper would largely become obsolete based on its other flaws. The fact that it would probably have fairly low durability as a tool, people would just end up using the same diamond and netherite stuff that they always end up using by like an hour or 2 into the game. If you know what you're doing, you have diamonds and enchanted gear, and you're set up for that endgame tool progression already. Using the turtle helmet as an example, nobody really uses them all that much because water breathing potions have already been in the game since time immemorial, and water breathing can be between 3 and 8 minutes duration, whereas the turtle helmet takes a while to grind up from those turtles, and it's really not going to give you all that much more breathing time, especially once you have enchantments like respiration added into the mix. It quickly becomes redundant, and so I really don't see copper having any kind of unique enchantment being that much of a benefit. I will say that aesthetically, I do quite like the idea of having copper tools, but honestly, that's something you could just do with gold tools and a texture pack if you wanted to put them up in an item frame or walk around carrying them. The fact is, copper just doesn't make a good fit for tools and armor. So exactly how easy is it to find a large amount of copper now? Well, if you'll excuse the lag spikes, I've actually gone caving nearby, and while I haven't found a huge copper vein just yet, Mojang has said that in this snapshot data pack, they did make the copper veins a little bit less abundant, like a little bit rarer and harder to find, but it looks like potentially down here we do have the beginning of a copper vein, and right here it already has a block of copper, a raw block of copper in the vein generation itself. Just a hop, a skip, and a jump away in this dark oak forest, I've found the start of our first copper vein. So realistically, that wasn't all that hard at all. And while I might have gotten lucky at finding this, as we did in the previous snapshot with the iron vein, because I loaded up a bunch of other worlds in that snapshot, and I never found another iron vein quite like that, although I did find copper veins in about 50% of the worlds that I loaded up on a snapshot testing stream. Yet we are going to get a fair amount of copper from these if we get lucky and run into one of these veins, which should be relatively easy. They're all accessible from the surface, more or less, because copper is the resource that you'll find above Y0, and so typically you'll be finding a lot of copper in the early game. Look at this, we already have over a stack plus this block of raw copper. We're going to start having to condense this down if we want to store it in large enough quantities, which once again, really great case being made here for being able to smelt that directly into blocks of copper if we want inventory management to work out in our favor here. But while we're digging this out, I would like to talk about why I think it's a good thing that Mojang has made copper so abundant when all it's used for right now is the spyglass, lightning rods, and a bunch of building blocks. I mean, first of all, the building blocks themselves, as I've said, represent something pretty cool in Minecraft. They are a kind of turning point in terms of block mechanics, where they've started to add in materials that can age, which I think is genuinely a really neat concept. And honestly, I love the copper color palette. I think the decayed blocks look really, really neat and provide a nice gradient just within the copper block family that we're going to be using for ages and ages to come. I think it's going to be a really neat way to add a little bit of steampunk spice to some of our builds and really take Minecraft forward into a new age of building. So copper brings a pretty cool aesthetic to the game. It's something builders are definitely going to love having a lot of, but when it comes to other players, the folks who prefer the more technical side of things, lightning rods aren't really going to do a whole lot for you. You can at least set up a farm to age some of these copper blocks for you and maybe even detect those changing as some kind of like long delay randomizer kind of thing, but even that is not really going to satisfy folks who prefer the technical side of things and really wanted a bit of an expansion in that respect. And maybe anyone who's on the fence is still going to learn to love copper, but personally, I think until it has more uses, players who want it to have a broader functionality are just going to ignore it for now, until later perhaps, when my hope is still that it ends up getting used as an expansion to Redstone. But one of the things I think has gone unspoken about the development of vanilla Minecraft is the inevitability of modded Minecraft. Because of course modded players have been used to having copper in the game for quite some time, and I think the introduction of vanilla copper basically represents a kind of quality of life update for the modded community. Now, it's been a while since I last played modded Minecraft, but when I did, I recall that there were a lot of technical mods that each introduced their own version of copper. They had to introduce their own copper ore and ingots just in case, for whatever reason, the players who were playing with those mods only had that mod installed, or only had like a mod pack where that was the main tech mod. They all needed to have their own branch of copper, and as such, you got 5 or 6 different types of copper in some mod packs that required a lot of tech mods to be installed. Basically, what you ended up with was copper overload, with the mods unable to rely on there being a universal type of copper in the world. any mod pack that used multiple tech mods had to include mods which allowed for transmutation of different types of copper or make those copper ingot recipes more adaptable, which just took a lot of extra time on the part of the mod pack makers making sure everything was going to be compatible. Now, I expect it's going to take modded Minecraft a while to catch up with 1.17 and beyond. I can imagine the world height changes alone are going to mean that a lot of modded players are panicking slightly considering how much is going to change about the landscape and how much is going to have to change about mods as a result. But I think in 1.17, before those changes take place, modded Minecraft can establish a kind of new base camp before climbing that particular mountain, and in the meantime, they would end up getting abundant access to copper, and it's a copper that every single mod can use because it's part of vanilla world generation. So between the modded community, the chance for Mojang to expand it in future, and builders who are going to absolutely love this, I honestly think copper has a fair amount of life in it. As an update for the broader community, it's got a lot going for it. And as you can see right now, I've now got enough for 37 or so full blocks of copper, meaning that I could get started on a copper build pretty easily if I'd stumbled upon this vein in a more permanent survival world. There is still stuff going on down there that's potentially going to lead away into a separate part of the vein, but that's really all I wanted to talk about for this episode. I feel like this has really been more of a deep dive on copper and its implications for the game, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the points I've made in this video. But for now, that's going to be it from me. Thank you so much for watching this video. My name has been Pixlriffs. Please don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.